So, hello everybody, Jamie Kubota from the Nutrition, Food Science and Packaging Department at San Jose State. Today I'm walking you through making a chicken soup using our rotisserie chicken carcass. So we cut up a chicken earlier, you can watch that video separately, and now we're going to make chicken soup from it. So I have the two, we did two, you can do one, whatever you have. These are the bones from the chicken that I cut up. I'm going to go ahead and put those into my pot. And there's also a nice little backbone there, a few little pieces of chicken. And then I'm going to add in the vegetables that are going to bring in all the flavor. So the traditional chicken soup is made with a mirepoix. That's the French term for onions, carrots, and celery. And it's really the base of many soups and sauces that you'll try. So we're going to prep our vegetables that go in. I've got the carrots. I've got two peeled already. I'm going to peel two. And I'm taking the peel off because these are, let me do that here for you. These are pretty old carrot. I shouldn't say terribly old. These are fine carrots. They may not be the freshest, and you'll find that that's sometimes a great way to use up things that are in your refrigerator is to make soups from it. So I'm peeling off that peel. I'm going to add that peel into my compost bin. Hopefully everybody's composting. We do compost here at San Jose State, only plant matter, because it's actually the San Jose State Community Garden that composts here on campus, and they only take plant matter. Some compost companies or rubbish companies, so where I live, any food can go into my compost, but here it's just this plant matter. So I do set it aside so that we can compost. And I've got my carrots ready. So I'm going to use about half of these carrots in my soup, and about half of these carrots are going to go into my chicken broth. And so what I can do is I can cut off those ends, right, that I normally would have put in the compost. I'm going to use those in my soup. I'm going to take the other end and I'm just going to cut off the very, very tip. So I don't necessarily want that in my soup, but the rest of these harder, tougher ends can certainly go into my stock. So I'm going to cut off some bigger pieces, and these bigger pieces I'm going to use to flavor my stock. Okay. And then these smaller pieces I'm going to go ahead and prep for my soup. So I'm going to cut them in half so that they're easier to slice. If I've got a flat surface, it makes it easier. Carrots, because they're round and they're rolly, they can be hard to manage on a cutting board, but I'm going to cut them in half. And then they're also in nice, I'll show you what I'm going to do. I'm going to cut them into rondelles. So I'm going to take these and I'm just going to slice them. And I'm going to do all my carrots, and I can line up the ones that are cut the same way. And I can do 3 at a time to save some time. I'm just going to prep these, so these will be ready for my soup later. Okay. Here's carrots. And then, so a few more carrots here. Now I can take a lot of time and make these absolutely uniform and pretty, but these are roughly equal width, so these are going to cook in roughly the same amount of time. So I've got my carrots prepped here. I also want some celery. So I have some celery ribs. So if you buy celery, you get a stalk of celery or a head of celery. Kelly, what do you call this?
I call it a bunch of celery.
A bunch of celery, okay? But usually what you need is just a stalk of the celery. So we're going to use about 3 of the stalks in our soup. And I've got one that's already clearly kind of beaten up, so that's a good one to go in my stock. And then my other celery, which is looking prettier, I'm going to save and use in my soup itself. So I'm just going to cut this kind of broken piece of celery up. So then it's not getting wasted, and I'm going to put that in with my soup. These little ends, you know, I can take off a little bit more of that. It can go in my stock. And the very end, that very end piece I'm going to throw in the compost. And then I've got these 2 nice pieces of celery. And I'm going to chop these smaller, to go in my chicken soup. And when I get down to the end, I've got a nice big piece there that's probably not as nice. It's starting to get bigger, so what I'll do is I'll cut it in half so I don't have huge pieces of celery in my soup. And what I want is, you know, about equal portions of celery and carrots. And that's probably right. I've got a little extra. I'm going to cut off those bottoms. I'm going to throw that in my stock or my soup. And these I'm going to save for snacking on later as celery sticks. Never want to waste anything in the kitchen. Okay, so I've got some celery sticks for later for snacking. Now, onion. This is a yellow onion. And there's a variety of different onions. There's white onion, yellow onion, red onion. You can use whatever onion you have. I tend to keep yellow onions for uses like this. And the way that you handle the onion is you've got two ends to the onion, right? This is the little root end, and this is the top, okay? I actually cut off the top. And this portion I'm going to throw in my compost because it's really papery, etc. And then what I do with the other side is, this can get kind of messy on my board, is I'm just going to cut, just cut that off. And that I'm going to throw in my compost as well. But I'm going to leave the onion attached because if it's held together, it's much easier for me to work with. I've got a flat side, and I'm actually going to lay it on that flat side, cut it through in half. And this was a huge onion. This was a really large onion. So this is more than I'm going to need. I'm going to use part of half in my stock, and I'm going to use the rest in my soup. Okay. So here's my onion. It comes in layers. Onions grow in layers. You peel the layers away. Those first few layers are papery and really inedible, so I'm going to pull those off, okay, and put those into my compost. And now I've got a nice piece of onion. It's held together, and I can work with this pretty easily. I'm going to cut it in half because I want half of it for my soup and half of it to make my broth. Okay. The first half I'm going to cut kind of big, so I'm just going to make one cut through it, but I cut through it, but not quite all the way through, so it's held together. I'm going to turn it and now make some big cuts through my onion to make some big pieces of onion that can go into my soup, my stock. Okay? And I'm going to throw those in. And the other part of my onion, I'm going to go ahead and dice up to go into my soup for later. So I'm using my cutting board. I don't have to go back and clean my cutting board and come back out with it. I'm just going to go ahead and prep what I need for later. And this I'm dicing smaller. And it's going to help to flavor my soup. Voila. That last little bit, again, I'm going to take that piece off so that we're not wasting it. I'm just going to throw that in to flavor my broth as well. Okay, so this is prepped and ready to go for the soup after I've made my broth. Here we have the bones and the bigger pieces of the onion and the carrots and the celery. What I'm going to do is I'm going to cover this with water. So I'm going to add water to cover all of this. And it really doesn't matter how much, just enough to cover everything. And then I'm going to put it on the stove, and I'm going to let this cook for an hour and a half, 2 hours to really get the flavor out of those veggies and out of the chicken and the chicken broth. And we're going to have a nice flavorful broth that we can make our soup from.
All right, so we have boiled down our chicken carcasses, added some of the mirepoix. We put a little bit of peppercorns in there and a couple of bay leaves, and that's really all we did, and added a bunch of water, brought it up to a full rolling boil, and then reduced it to a nice simmer, simmered it for a couple hours, and now we're ready to strain off our
So
stock.
a simmer, Kelly, means just a very, very gentle boil, or just under a boil, right? So we're not allowing this to cook too hard, but we do want to have it up there so that we can get the flavor out of it.
Yeah, it needs to be moving, a real moving boil, but not a fast boil.
During that process, so that took about an hour and a half, 2 hours. During that process, you can skim So you'll see that some things start to float up to the top and you get a little bit of foam and a little bit of funny stuff looking on the top of yours. So we had some there for a minute.
Come on, I just stirred it in by accident, but basically you get
as it's cooking, you can skim that out.
Little bits of proteins that have come up to the surface from the bones and from the meat. We just want it to be nice, so that's why we'll strain it, and we've been skimming it as we go. So what I'm going to do, since we have a fair amount of solids here for safety, is I'm going to spoon some of them first just into our strainer.
And the other thing is that we used a rotisserie chicken here. So you do often make chicken broth just with leftover bones that you have from raw chicken, and those haven't been seasoned. So in that case, you might need to season your broth. But because we use that rotisserie chicken, we've got a lot of that flavor and seasoning already in our broth. So likely we're not going to have to add any other seasoning.
All right, I'm going in.
And depending on how much, we had 2 chickens in here, so that was quite a bit of bones, right?
It's quite a bit of solids.
I'm going to try to help Kelly out here.
Thank you.
Since we're here together, I can help her with this.
It's always more fun to cook with a friend. All right.
So helpful. Okay.
All right. So we want to press on these solids a bit
Let me take that out of the way.
to make sure we get all of the goodness down into that pot. These solids now have no flavor left in them. They're of no value there. If you're allowed to compost meat, you compost them. They're really flavor-free now. All right, I'm going to lift that up. And there you go to make the soup.
Where's our spoon?
There
I think
you
we're
go.
just going to have a little
do you think?
taste. I need could you hand me one of our tasting spoons, Kelly, right there? So this is the way that you taste. You check for things. Is rather than put my spoon in and taste it, I'm going to put a little bit of my broth right into my tasting spoon so I don't contaminate that whole broth.
So Chef Jamie is checking to see how seasoned it is to begin with.
And it's already pretty seasoned.
Yeah, it was pretty. And remember, when you boil something down, you concentrate whatever salt there is in there. You've evaporated water, so you've concentrated the salt.
And so to make our chicken soup, we're just going to make a real traditional chicken soup. And this is going to be like a chicken soup base because we can use this, we can add noodles to it, so we can cook noodles separately and add noodles to it and have chicken noodle soup. You could add some rice to it. So if you have leftover rice from the night before, you can have chicken and rice soup. You could use this broth and make it into ramen. So oftentimes we make ramen. We know we all do as college students, eat ramen on occasion. You know, that flavor packet, it comes with a lot of sodium and MSG and other things in it. You could use your own broth. And if you wanted to give it more of an Asian flavor, you could add a little bit of soy sauce, a little ginger, green onion, garlic, and you can get all of those Asian flavors that you're craving in your ramen, right? So we can use this as a base. We're going to go ahead and cook it up with our veggies. So these we chopped up earlier. We've got our onion and our carrot and our celery. I'm going to put it all in.
That looks about right.
That looks about right. And we'll give that a stir. We'll put that on the heat, and we're going to let this go probably until those vegetables are softened, a good 20, 25 minutes. And then towards the end of that cooking process, I'm going to add in our rotisserie chicken. It's already cooked, so I don't need to add it in at this point. I'll add it in towards the end of the cooking process. So we'll let this go 20, 25 minutes.
You probably don't really want to boil that a bunch. It'll just make it kind of tough and rubbery and it won't be as fun. So we're going to get this cooked and then...
we'll show you a few ways you can dish this up.
Right.
Okay, so we have our chicken soup. We added our veggies, cooked it down. I'm going to add in our chicken. So we have our rotisserie chicken cubed up, ready to go. Add that in. So this is essentially our chicken soup base. So the last thing I need to do is just taste it, make sure it's seasoned, and then we can plate that. So I'm going to do a little tasting, make sure everything's seasoned. So remember we made this with rotisserie chicken, so it already had some salt and pepper, some seasonings in it. I think I could use just a touch more salt. So I'm going to add in just a touch more salt, a touch more pepper, and that's it. It's good to go. Now, because we always like to add in as many veggies as we can, we're going to throw in some spinach to this. And the spinach wilts in really quickly, so it doesn't need much time. Turn this up. We're going to add in a couple good handfuls of the baby spinach. There we go, and that will wilt in. Add a bit of nutrition and a bit of green color. You just usually add it in right at the end, so when I'm reheating, I would add that in. Okay. We'll let that wilt in, and then I'm gonna plate this. So, good old chicken noodle soup. We have some noodles that I just finished cooking. So one of the things that I like to do, I like to use this as a base, as a template, and then add in my noodles, add in my rice, add in matzo balls after they've already been cooked. I don't like to cook my noodles in the soup because what happens is rarely do I eat a whole pot of soup. Most people don't eat the whole pot of soup. They're gonna save some for another time. And if you let those noodles cook in the soup and then sit in the soup as you store it, they take up more and more and more of the broth. They become overcooked and just not as nice to enjoy, and they take up all the broth. So the easier way, or I find the better way to do that, is to cook them separately and add them in when you're gonna eat. So there we go. That did wilt in really nicely. Let me pull up some of my noodles. I'm gonna add in some of my noodles to my bowl. And this is just vermicelli. You can use whatever noodle you have. So if you're cooking pasta for another meal, just save aside some of your noodles, toss them with just a little bit of butter, a little oil so they don't stick, and you can put those in the refrigerator and add them into soup and things like that. So here we go. I'm gonna make sure I get plenty of veggies. And I have chicken noodle soup. And then I also prepared some matzo balls. So this is just according to the matzo ball package. There's matzo meal that you can buy, and you can also buy matzo meal or matzo ball mix. And so you just have to add a little bit of oil and egg, you mix it up, you let it sit in the refrigerator, and then you form it into little bowls, and you boil those in a pot of water. It takes about 20 minutes to cook those. So I did those ahead of time. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna do two things. For my matzo ball soup, I like a little bit of dill in the soup. So I'm gonna add a little bit of dill to my soup. It just gives it that unique flavor that is matzo ball, is to have the dill. Okay. So I'm gonna add a little dill. You can smell it. And this is comfort food for me as well. So I love chicken noodle soup, I love matzo ball soup. Anytime that I'm feeling under the weather, that's when I reach for something like this. I'm gonna put like 3 or 4 of my matzo balls in my bowl, and then add the soup on top of that, and yum. Good to go. There we go. Chicken soup with matzo balls and chicken soup with noodles.